Before you get started on the second portion of this exercise, you should have already finished roughing in the position of the tail as it follows the ball along its bouncing path. Now in this portion of the exercise, we're going to be cleaning up the tail's movement and creating all of the frames in between that allows it to follow the ball consistently. Now you'll notice in the arced path of the tail that essentially it's doing the same thing twice. The other thing to notice is that the tail doesn't really need to start or to show up until the ball is fully in frame. So I'm actually going to start drawing my tail on frame number 12, that last frame just before it squashes down into the frame. To do this, let's go down to our timeline, and we're going to go ahead and lock down all of the other frames just to make sure we don't accidentally work on those. From here, let's create a new layer, and this is going to be called our tail layer. This will be the tail as it's cleaned up. Now we want to start on that frame just before it squashes down, so in this case it'll be frame number 12. And with that selected, I'm going to hit F6 to insert a new keyframe to let that be the starting point for what that we draw. Now if you're following along in the book is going to outline two different ways to draw the tail. The first way is to use the pencil tool, and the second way is to draw it using the rectangle tool. Now in my experience, I actually find what we're going to be doing easier to do if we use the rectangle tool to draw it off. But just know, you're welcome to use the pencil tool if you find that to be easier. Since I'm working on my laptop and I don't have my drawing tablet, I'm going to go with the rectangle option to draw off our tail. So with that, choose your rectangle tool, and let's go over to our tool properties. First off, make sure that object drawing mode is unchecked and turned off. This means when you make the rectangle, if you were to select it, you don't get a blue box around it. Instead, you get the little dot pattern inside of it. That's going to be very important to have it turned off. Next, let's select our fill color, and let's set our fill color to be kind of a medium brown. I think this brown right here will work pretty good. Now our box is not going to have a stroke, so we don't need to worry about stroke color or any of the profile along with it. I'm going to zoom in so that I can see my tail just a little bit easier, and let's click and drag and create a simple little rectangle for now. Now in order to get our rectangle to fit the shape of the tail, here's how we're going to warp it. First off, choose your black arrow selection tool. With that tool selected, you can click on the bottom right corner and attach it to where the bottom portion of the tail connects to the ball. Then you can choose the top right corner. Let's put that in the middle of the right side of the tail. So I'm placing it there. And then we can do the left top corner, place this at the top end of the tail, and then this bottom left corner, we'll place it in the middle of where the left side of the tail is. So you should have a structure that looks something like this. From here, you can now click on the edges in between each of those points and curve the rectangle to match the bend of your tail. Now again, if it's not 100% perfect, that's okay. We're simply wanting to rough in how this tail is placed and how it should move and be distorted into here. So you can always move these around just to give yourself a good looking tail. And I think that looks pretty good for what it is. With this tail complete, let's step forward to the next keyframe, and this is where the ball hits the ground, and we need to make a new symbol or a new tail for this one as well. So once we've stepped forward, let's insert a new keyframe, hit F6, and we can use our existing tail and simply modify it, so that it fits our new tail that we have. Select our black arrow tool, delete away our tail, select your rectangle tool and create a new rectangle. Again, choose your black arrow tool, and let's match up the corners where they need to be. Placing one at the point where it connects to the tail, one at each end, and the other one placed at the middle point of the tail. Then with the black arrow, all you have to do is click on the edges and have them form and move around wherever necessary. Now if you need to, you can hold down the Option key. This will create a new point, which you can then drag out, and then you can add on and modify the lines in between. So if you need to be able to move it or add on or shape it out a little bit better, holding down Option will allow you to add more points. So let's say right here I wanted to round this over a little bit more. Holding down Option, click and drag. You can see initially this point is going to be a little bit straight. I'm just going to pull up until I get the size that I want for this one. With that done, let's move forward to the next keyframe. You can see it's rebounding into the air. This is where it's launched off. So with that done, we'll select the new keyframe, hit F6. We can delete away our tail. Choose your rectangle. We'll click and drag. Choose your black arrow tool and start matching up the two different points between here. So there's that one there. This one, and this one. With the black arrow, you can still click and drag and select it. In this case, maybe I want to get it nice and rounded, but I want to pull this part over. So I'm going to hold down Option, click and drag. That'll give me a little bit more roundedness that I can then move and place exactly where I want it to go. So take your time, redo the tail, placing it exactly where it needs to be, and then move forward for each frame. Now that we've got our 3 keyframes for the landing portion of the tail, we're going to advance forward to get to the keyframe where it's in between the highest point. As we've done before, let's insert a new keyframe right here. We'll delete away our tail, and let's redraw the tail in mid-air. So click and drag. Choose your black arrow selection tool. Line up the points as necessary. And then click and drag to create the curvature that's needed as well. Keep in mind, your tail doesn't have to be 100% perfect to match what you have. As long as you're getting close to it, that's what we want to see. So for now, we're going to repeat the same process and having the ball complete this first arc. But once we reach the second part, I'm going to pause here and show you what we'll do for the second jump to make it a little bit easier. Now that I've reached the starting position for the second bounce, since it's the same, all I'm going to do is create new keyframes and copy and paste over the same tail, so I don't have to redraw the whole thing. So now that I'm here, in this case it'll be frame 34, we'll hit F6, create a new keyframe, we'll delete away our tail, then we can go back to our first little keyframe, frame 12, and let's copy that. Edit and copy. Then we can return back to our first keyframe here, frame 34. Let's go up to Edit, Paste in the center. And all I need to do is move this down so that it matches the same place here. Move forward to the next keyframe and do the same thing. Hit F6, immediately delete away what you have, then return to the previous landing one, in this case frame 13. With it selected, we can do Command C to copy it. Then return back to frame 35, Command V to paste it. All I've got to do is move it into the appropriate place where it needs to be down here. Repeating this process for the entire sequence as it goes up and then lands back here as well. Now once it reaches this point, this is where it's not going to be returning back up, but it's actually going to have the tail falling back down to this point. But I'm going to speed ahead and repeat this process for the rest of this arch on this ball's bounce. Alright, with each of these tails done, I'm going to stop right here just before the final tail sequence, and let's turn this ball's tail into its own animated symbol. With this done, now let's see if we can turn the tail itself into an animated symbol. Now if you're following along in the book, this part seems a little bit tricky, but here's what they're doing. We're going to select all of the tails that we've created and pull them together till they're all flapping from one central point. So to do this, let's go back to our timeline, and I'm going to return to frame number 12, right where we first started drawing our tail. Also, to make things a little bit simpler, I'm going to turn off visibility for my ball and the rough animation for now, just so I can see my tail and the tail just by itself. With that first frame selected, we can turn on our onion skin, and let's drag out the onion skin so that we can see all of the different tails as they're moving. We want to take each of these tails and drag them back to this central point on the first frame that we have, or frame 12. So moving forward, our next keyframe is frame 13. I'm going to use my black arrow selection tool, and I can see that it's already selected too. Notice that it's the brown one we want to click on. Next, I can move forward to frame 14. So here's the connection point for the tail. I'm going to take it and drag it until it connects right here as well. Let's move forward to the next keyframe. Keyframe, in my case, 18. There it is for this one. So we want this point. So I'm going to click on the tail and drag it down to here so that it connects back to that one. Then go to the next keyframe, in my case, frame 24. We'll drag it until it connects back to here. And if you need to, you can use your arrow tools to nudge it into place. Go into the next keyframe of 31. We'll take that, drag it back to its original starting point, back to there. Notice that as you move forward, you may have to adjust your onion skin so that you can see that original starting point. Take this one frame at a time, or one keyframe at a time, selecting the brown one and then moving it back to that central point where they all connect and meet back to here. Now that we've done this, we can turn off our onion skin mode. And you can see if we play this back, all it's going to do is have our tail flapping in one central location. This is what we want to have to start to animate our tail in between everything else. Let's turn this into its own symbol now. Go into our timeline, select that first keyframe on the tail's cleanup, hold down Shift, and select the very last keyframe. With all of this done, you can right-click and let's copy the frames. This will get all of those frames that are in between. Now let's go over to our library and let's create a new symbol. So going down to the very bottom of your library panel, click on the little plus sign. This will ask you to create a new graphic symbol. We're going to call this the ball tail. Do make sure the type is going to be a graphic. And we'll say OK. Then we're going to go down to our timeline and right-click and let's paste the frames. This will place the frames right there in the very middle. Now when we pasted these frames, I don't see my tail. If I was to back out, I'm going to do Command minus to back out. You can see it's down here at the bottom left-hand corner. I want to be able to move this back to our central little registration point. Now rather than going through each and every frame and then repositioning it back up here, there's a much faster way of doing it. Going down to your timeline, locate the Edit Multiple Frames selection. With this selected, this will allow you to click and drag over a selected range of frames that you want to be able to edit. In our case, we want to select everything that's within this range. So click on each of those edges and drag it out until you get all of the frames highlighted. You'll see when you do this, all those frames will start to appear on your screen. Then you can use your black arrow selection tool and carefully click and drag over all of the frames selected. So this will get everything that we have. With all of those selected, simply click in the middle of it and drag it up and over until those central points align with the little plus sign or the little crosshair in the middle here. This will move everything up into position where it needs to be. With that done, let's turn off Edit Multiple Frames, and now we can focus on doing our shape tweens between each of the different shape movements. I'm going to zoom in so I can see my little tail by itself. And the first shape tween that we want to do isn't going to necessarily happen at the first frame or the second, simply because that's just one frame in between. We're going to start it on this third frame. So with the third keyframe selected, right-click on it and choose Shape Tween. Notice when it does this, it'll give you an orange arrow connecting to the next keyframe. From here, we can use the period button on our keyboard to advance forward to give us an idea of how that shape will move. And as long as it's moving in kind of a natural form, this will give you a good idea of how it should move between those two. So that actually worked out pretty good. Let's do the second one. Going down here, select the frame number 7 in my case, or the next keyframe. Right click on that. Let's do a shape tween from this position up to this position. Doing that and moving up into there as well. So that's actually working well too. Repeat this process for each of the major keyframes. Right clicking on the keyframe itself, make sure to choose shape tween, and then tween into the next position. Now so far it's been working out pretty good. However, watch what happens when I create a shape tween for this one. We'll insert a shape tween here. We want it to move from this complex shape down to this complex shape, and you can see it's really getting off on where it needs to have those points be. So in order to help it out, we're going to do some shape hints. We'll start off by clicking on the keyframe that's starting on. In this case, mine for frame number 20. With that frame selected, go up to Modify, Shape, and let's add a shape hint. This will give us the letter A, and I'm going to set letter A to be the starting point at the bottom. Let's do a couple of other ones. Modify, Shape, Add Shape Hint. Notice that Shift-Command-H is the keyboard shortcut. This will give us B. I'll set B to be in the middle. Shift-Command-H, give us another one. We'll put this at C at the top. And Shift-Command-H, D to be placed right here. With all of those placed on here, A, B, C, and D, we can return to our timeline. Let's choose the next keyframe that's giving us difficulty. From here, I know where A, B, and C need to be on this one. It's going to give us all of our letters, but it's going in the opposite direction. So here's D. D was placed here. C was placed at the top. B can stay right here in the middle. And then A is going to be placed down here. Now when I return to my starting point keyframe and I move forward, you can see that it's actually moving in a much more natural position and way. Going to the next one, there's no need for a shape tween, but we will do one for this one. So again, right click on it, create your shape tween, and then make sure that it's modifying correctly in between both of those. That's actually looking pretty good. Create a shape tween between these two. Okay, so it'll move up and create a shape tween between these. Around, and then I'll probably need a modifier for this one. Create a shape tween for this one. You can see that's going to need it as well. So in this case, I'll return to my initial points. Shift-Command-H, we'll put one here. Shift-Command-H, put one in the middle here. Command-H, put one at the top. And Shift-Command-H, put one in the middle here. With that done on this initial one, go to your last keyframe and then work backwards. Here it is for D, C, B will remain roughly the same, and then A right here. Let's actually move that up just a bit. Now when I back out, you can see it's going to morph much nicely with this one. The other thing I can do is if I want there to be a little bit more change in how my tail is moving. Let's say I don't necessarily want it to just rotate into place from this position up here. I want it to change up and do something different. So let's say I wanted where it's going out to go in and go in to go out. I'm going to select this particular shape and I can modify it. So I'm going to drag this one down. We'll put this one up, drag this one up, pull this one down to match it. Between here, the computer will do all of the work necessary in order to change out the shape and make it look however it needs. So if I was to go back, you can see how it's going to blend out those two shapes in between. Now if for some reason there's also some difficulty in changing this, you can always go in and add your modifier keys. In this case, I can see there's a little bit of issue with this one. So I'm going to go back to this keyframe. Let's insert our shape hints. Shift-Command-H will give us an A. Start here. Shift-Command-H. Oops. Click on B, put it there. Shift-Command-H, C, and Shift-Command-H for D down here. Go into my next shape that it tweens to. It's already got some points for the other one, but I'm looking at these red ones. So as I've done before, carefully click on the D. I'll have it select there, C, B will be on there, and then A will move down to here. Now when I back up in time, you can see it will correctly associate between this one. So now if I was to play it, you can see this gives us our shape blending for our tail as it wags. With this done, now let's see if we can add this ball tail symbol to our original ball. We'll go back up and hit the back arrow to go back to our main scene. Since we no longer need this original tail, let's turn off visibility for it, but let's turn back on visibility for our ball so we can edit it. And I'm going to go back to my timeline for the keyframe number 1 so I can see the ball. I'll even zoom out so I can see the starting point for it. To edit the ball, we do need to unlock that ball layer and select the first frame of the ball. Double click on that ball. Notice when you double click on it, here's all the timeline for the bouncing of the ball that we have. We need to create its own layer for the tail, so I'm going to choose create a new layer, and we'll call this my tail layer. It's correct spelling. And I'm going to put my tail below the ball layer, so I click and drag and bring it down to here. From here, we started the bouncing of the ball on frame number 12, just before it squashed down. So I'm going to go to that 12th keyframe and insert it here, hit F6 to give me my new keyframe, and this is where we want the tail of the ball to start. So going over to my library, I'm going to click and drag on one of my tails, and I'm going to let the tail connect itself right to the ball down here. If you can't see it, we'll move it over just a bit to have it connect with that one right there. So that looks good with that. Actually, at this time, if you want to be able to see your tail, you may want to keep that layer on top of this, just so I can see it and nudge it into place. Now let's have the tail match all of the frame movements for the bouncing of the ball. So as I move forward to the next keyframe, frame number 13, we'll hit F6, and we'll make sure our tail is nice and aligned with the ball as well. Move forward to the next keyframe, hit F6, move the tail back up into position there. Move forward to the next keyframe, which will have the ball all the way up here at the top. We'll hit F6, move the tail up and into position to follow it up here. Now you can see what we're doing. We're matching all the movement of the ball for the tail and the ball itself. When we go back, we can insert our classic tween, or excuse me, between those two, and we'll have the tail follow as it goes up. Now notice that the tail is going off by just a bit. The reason for this is simply because the tail or the ball has a different easing in and easing out. If I was to select the ball's timeline and go to the properties, I can see it's doing a classic easing out of 100%. Let's do the same ease out for the tail. So select the tail here, set your classic ease, and bump that number all the way up to 100 as well. Now with the tail easing out, it should follow along with the ball as well. Moving on, go to the next keyframe. We'll insert F6 and have the tail fall back down into place with the ball at this position. If you want, you can go ahead and insert your tween. So we'll do a classic tween between both of those. And the ball is easing in at a negative 100, so the tail needs to ease in at a negative 100. At a classic ease, click on the number, negative 100 there. So as the ball falls, you can see the tail is going to fall along with it as well. Continuing on, repeat the same process, adding all of the motion tweens and easing in until the ball comes to a final stopping point here. Now, the last thing that I'll point out, once it reaches this last little sequence, this is where the ball is coming to a stop, and we actually want the last part of the tail overlapping and coming to an end. So once you reach this last sequence, go ahead and insert a keyframe, but delete away the tail so that there's no tail visible on this last little part. We're going to draw in those individual frames to finish out our sequence. With this done, we can return to scene 1. We've got our ball visible, but we've turned off the original tail. I'm going to turn back on my background. Let's test our animation to see what we have. We'll go up to Control, down to Test, and you can see how it bounces in the way. Now, one thing that I did do was I had the tail still wagging on this end, so here's the reason for that happening. If we go up to our tail, even though the visibility is turned off, it's still visible, or it's still going to be visible when it's the final render. So if you want, you can right-click on it and turn this into a guide as well, and that will hide that. One thing that we didn't do is let's double-click on our ball again, and let's return the tail below this layer. So clicking on it and drag it down, so now it's behind the ball as it wags. Now with it done, we can return to scene 1. You can get an idea of the tail as it follows along as well. So from this position, let's go down to our timeline and let's turn on visibility for our rough animation so we can see these last few keyframes for the falling of the tail. In order to draw this, we want this to be in front of our ball. So let's go back down to our timeline. At the very top, or at least in front of the ball, let's create a new layer, and this will call this our falling tail. There we go. From here, it's a simple matter of drawing off the tail in each of the different keyframes from the rest of the way. So I'm going to pick up where the last keyframe left off, just as it hits the ground. Now, since we're not doing any kind of shape tweening, and because of the complexity of this tail, I'm going to suggest using the pencil tool to draw this off. With the pencil tool selected, go over to your Properties panel, choose the tool. Let's make sure we have it set to be a really smooth drawing. So I'm going to choose Smooth as our option. Do make sure that Drawing Object Mode is turned off or unselected. And let's choose the same color brown that we used last time for our stroke. As far as the stroke size goes, we can keep it at a pretty small one. We're going to fill this in a little bit later. So I'm going to set this to be relatively low and set my width profile to be a normal profile from here. From here, we'll zoom in. Let's go down to our tail timeline. And I'm going to insert a new keyframe, hitting F6 at the starting point here. Then it's a simple matter of tracing off our tail. Once it's traced off, go over to your Fill Bucket tool, and then click inside of it to fill it in. From here, if you need to make any edits or changes, you can use either your paintbrush or your pencil tool to go in and draw off any parts that you think were misdone. For instance, I think I need to make the tail a little bit thicker down here at the bottom. So I'll just click and drag through. Then I'll grab my paint bucket and I'll fill in that missing part down here. Now we step forward to the next keyframe, insert a new keyframe, and repeat the process for each of the different ones. Remember, once you create your new keyframe, make sure to delete away your old tail so that you can redraw a new tail in its place. With that done, let's go through and test our animation. First, we'll go down to our rough animation, turn off the visibility for it, hit return, and play through. Very good. It's at this time you can go back through your animation and make any tweaks or adjustments that you want. Once you're finished, let's go up to File and we'll do a Save As. Make sure your name is on your document and that you're saving this as an animate document. When you hit Save, this file is what you'll upload to Moodle for your exercise grade.